Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Municipal Systems, OT Cybersecurity Strategies. I'm Kara. I'm glad you're here. Today we're joined by Roger, CEO and founder here at Hillstrong Group Security, and Gabriel, OT Cybersecurity Executive Director at Jacobs. Remember, this is a live event. We welcome questions, so pop those into the chat anytime throughout, and we'll get to those if time allows at the end. Thanks again for being here. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us today for this webinar. I've been looking forward to this conversation with my friend Gabriel here for a while. So I've known Gabriel for a bit now, to a previous life, and welcome, Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Like Roger mentioned, we've known each other for some years, kind of in passing within the ICS OT cybersecurity space, but very happy to be having this discussion and excited to definitely jump in.
It's great to talk to somebody else with a radio announcer voice. So,
Indeed.
You know, Gabriel, one of the things that I really like to do when I kick these webinars off, I think it's just a personal thing with me.
Mhm.
I love to have people kind of talk about their personal journey, because I'm just utterly convinced, maybe it's an age thing, that the personal journey that you've taken to land where you are today really strongly influences a lot of your opinions and insights, and I think it's just interesting to the audience. So I think everyone knows me by now, so I'm not even going to bore anyone.
Yeah.
But Gabriel, would you care to introduce yourself and maybe just think about what's your personal journey?
Now I'm going to ask you something, Roger. I'm going to ask you, do you want the long version of the personal journey, or do you want maybe an abbreviated, maybe 5 to 8 minutes version worth?
Well, we've got a few minutes before the webinar is over, so why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Okay. So my name is Gabriel Agboruche, and I guess I started off born and raised and grew up in Detroit, Michigan. This is in the Midwest, very automotive focused environment. And very early on, I had a very strong liking to math, right? So my mom, against some of my pushback, she actually had me in a math program. It was actually a summer math camp called the Wayne State Math Corps. So during this time, I was spending every single summer doing algebra, doing calculus during the summer, right? So this is something that's kind of very different as it concerns what kids typically grow up doing. They might have soccer camp, they might have basketball camp or something. So, that was a big thing of mine. And I think that really kind of started to push me towards that of the engineering type of area, or the engineering type of disciplines, because I had met a engineer for Ford Motor Company. He was a local Detroiter, African American like myself, and I didn't even know what an engineer was, but I saw that, hey, math was a big foundation to engineering, and that was kind of one of the starts to me jumping into this particular field. I chose to go into undergrad at Michigan Technological University as an electrical engineer. And that was really the start of everything. I had to focus in on power systems. So focused in heavily on generation, transmission, and distribution of power systems in undergrad. And eventually I wound up working at a nuclear plant for a local utility called Detroit Edison. And during that time, I was a nuclear INC engineer, where we were focusing in on digital systems, the sensors and the flow meters, Yokogawas, Emerson, all types of DC, you name it. And that was kind of a lot of my start into the field. And something that changed it, right, was Stuxnet. Stuxnet absolutely changed my life, because after Stuxnet happened, right, the Middle Eastern malware, the technologies and the equipment being used in that facility that was compromised in Iran was some of the same stuff that we were using for commercial nuclear here in the US. So as a result, my small nuclear plant, our boiling water reactor here in Detroit, Michigan, started implementing all this cybersecurity guidance that was coming down from the federal government. So I was the youngest guy around. They said, hey, let's put them on all the cyber stuff. Let's train them up. And and make him into this nuclear cyber guy, right? Which didn't even exist during my undergrad. So that's really how I got into cybersecurity. It was really because of Stuxnet. And I'll pause there for sure.
It's so funny. I think when we talk about this community for the ICS cybersecurity, it's almost like you can talk pre-Stuxnet, post-Stuxnet.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I think it really was that epiphany moment for so many of us, right? I'm an old industrial guy. Have worked in so many different industrial verticals. 16 plus years of Siemens and then Rockwell and another tech startup in between. But
Yep.
I think for me, a little story of myself, kind of a dad joke. But anytime we're watching TV and I'd cruise channel surf and I'd come across how it's made, I'd always have a story. And the kids like, Dad, no, another story. But I've just always been fascinated, and I wanted to help protect those systems. But switching gears just to kind of talk about the water sector and municipalities.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little bit of a high-level overview of what your focus is there, and maybe we can talk about some of the unique challenges and constraints with that in that space.
Absolutely.
Compare notes here, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jacobs as a large global engineering firm, we have a focus here with a large customer base of municipal water and wastewater organizations. And when you talk about municipalities, these are government ran or utility ran organizations that are providing water, safe water resources, water treatment, and just overall delivery of safe water to local population. So this is typically government ran, or local utility ran. So we have a large portfolio of customers who we support in that sense. And they've recently, I say within the last 2 or 3 years, have come onto the map as a soft spot as it concerns some of the cyber threat activities that have been occurring. I mean, in some notable ways, you see a lot of the geopolitical tensions that have been happening between nation and advanced persistent threat this, and Volt Typhoon, which is known to get into critical infrastructure environments. And I don't want there to be so much fear behind it, but the truth is that local organizations, notably water municipalities, have been caught in the crossfire of some of this threat activity as nations have been going against nations. It's almost like civilians being affected by the cyber crossfire happening around the world. So that's a little bit about what the organizations that we support, and the problem statement there is that civilians are becoming a part of the military and nation wars that are occurring today.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I focus, well, a lot of different sectors, but been really focused on global manufacturing for a bit now. And one of the largest contrasts I would kind of paint a picture of here is for generally speaking, when it comes to global manufacturing, it's not as much about being critical infrastructure, although some manufacturers fall into that category. But just from a bad actor and motivation perspective,
Right.
It's really much more about, from an external threat, it's much more about maybe ransomware. So, and that impact to that business, right? Conversely, I think when we look at the evolution of RAS, or ransomware as a service, and some of these affiliates that are actually running this now, they're financially motivated, and there's so much public available information that you can they're targeting who they're going to go after. I think when we're looking at water, I look at the water sector as it's absolutely critical infrastructure. And I think there's two elements there. One is there's the threat of a bad actor of what they could achieve with nefarious motivations, right?
Mhm.
But then there's the psychological impact of just the media splash of your water systems being attacked.
Mhm.
That
Right.
fear, and that can actually be one of the motivations there. So now, from a ransomware perspective, though, I can tell you one thing: if I was a ransomware gang, I wouldn't be targeting municipalities because
No,
you're not
no,
going to make any money.
no,
But anyway,
no,
that's just the high
no,
level how I'm
true.
looking at it. What are your thoughts?
No, absolutely there. So a little bit more about my background and my
Yeah.
journey. Previous to being here at Jacobs, I worked for organizations, consulting organizations like Mandiant and Accenture, who literally have these retainers, these incident response retainers with organizations, with
Yeah.
some of these organizations, not really municipalities, but large organizations. And one thing that I dealt with was OT incident response. So I would be on the triage calls. I would be on the Friday night calls that, hey, ransomware got into this manufacturing facility, or most notably, I was one of the incident responders for the Colonial Pipeline incident when that occurred. So you talk about the psychological effects of what happens on the news, right? Hey, you know, Russia is in here. They have hacked into the Colonial Pipeline organization, and we don't have gas, and it's going to cause mass hysteria, and all these lines are backed up. I mean, just the visuals of it is something that is really, like you mentioned, a psychological effect of what these cyber hacks have been. So I
Yeah.
think there's an element of that, but there's also an element of that preparedness, right? Organizations, as they see this happening to some of these larger organizations, these hacks around the world, they are also trying to understand, hey, how do I prepare for something like this? How can I be equipped to deal with this? Because one thing that's very notable about water municipalities is that of budget, right? They're not implementing
Yeah.
large, in many cases, large, transformational, zero trust, expensive architecture,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
large deployments down into their control system environment. So the budget, in many cases, isn't there, and that's very understandable. But should they be more vulnerable because the budget isn't there? I'd say no. And government organizations are offering support in many of these cases. Like CISA, they do the public IP address space scanning for free, and they do assessments and evaluations. The FBI and the EPA, they have all types of guidance that they throw out there. So it's a challenge. It's a
Yeah.
soft spot for critical infrastructure. But I don't think that budget should be the major thing that holds them back from being protected.
Yeah. Yeah. So I totally agree with you, Gabriel.
Yeah.
So even going back pre, me diving into OT cybersecurity
Mhm.
in that post Stuxnet world, there was challenges just being with a large industrial automation OEM vendor, right, of dealing with the water sector, because you had such. I mean, when we're talking about the long life cycles, what we're really talking about is the water sector, right?
Yes.
It's a reality, and it's a reality in a couple of different ways, right? I think when you're looking at a lot of the industrial automation control systems within the water sector, whether it's on the freshwater side or the wastewater, um, that can actually be viewed as a constraint, or maybe some challenges in terms of realizing some cybersecurity controls and
Right.
environments. But maybe there's another lens of, can the same constraints of these legacy ICS environments and
Yeah.
architecture be used to an advantage?
Hmm.
So,
I can see that. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
one of the things that I was thinking about is, I had an engagement where they were dropped from Ethernet on that DMZ firewall to
Okay.
Modbus RTU,
Mhm.
and then converted back. And
Okay.
what's interesting there is like, well, why would you do that? Number
Mhm.
one, but it in a way it kind of acted as okay, it's a little bit more challenging with the non-routable communication. But
Mhm.
one of the other things that I see as a real challenge is it's on the personnel side.
Yeah, that's a
The
biggie. That's a biggie.
one common denominator I've seen, Gabriel, I'd like to see what your thoughts are,
Sure.
is they're staff constrained,
Mhm.
wearing multiple hats. But what I will say, almost without any gap, is that almost every organization, there's some really good engineers.
There are. Yeah.
So, it's small teams,
Mhm.
overly taxed, but they know their systems really well. And that's a heck of an advantage to
Hundred
be
percent.
used as a defender.
100%. And I think that so kind of one note on the what can an adversary do with serial communications, right? I've done a lot of red teaming and pen testing within OT as well. I've kind of covered the full gambit on the incident response and the pen testing
Mhm.
piece. But other than fuzzing protocols or right, what can an adversary really do with serial
Yeah.
communication? So I do think yes, there is an advantage there with some of these quote unquote antiquated ways of control system data being proliferated throughout the environment. So yes, I do agree
Yeah.
with that point for sure. And then I also agree with the point that yes, great engineers in many cases just not very cyber informed at times.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And many cases, like we missing with these water municipalities, they're focusing on treatment plants, pump stations. They're looking at delivering clean, safe water, removing particulates and contaminants, and
Mhm.
injecting fluoride into the that's what they're focusing on as it concerns their day-to-day job. The cyber stuff just isn't the major priority for these folk. And I think that in many cases when we've engaged with customers, because we've done a lot of these what you call risk and resilience assessments, which
Mhm.
has been mandated by the Environmental Protection Agency, there were some glaring things that came up, and that was one of the major things is that of not really understanding cyber. So I do think that is an issue, but I do think at the same time you have networking professionals, SCADA professionals who it's not too difficult for them to jump into the cyber, put on their cyber hats, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
as a previous INC engineer myself, it was a challenge, right? In really going from, well, at least in the plant, uh, nuclear, atomic energy, and focusing on flow pumps and regulators and pressure valves to going to networking and IP addresses, MAC addresses, and port security on routers. And there was a transition, but I don't think it's impossible, especially when there is help and assistance. And I have a big heart for educating, right, as it concerns critical infrastructure or OT cybersecurity. I recently, not to go too deep into it, but I recently have released a course on LinkedIn Learning on critical infrastructure cybersecurity, and I think and it's been getting some really good reviews. And I think that the overall industry, I think CompTIA is going to be releasing a Sec OT or Security OT certification.
Oh.
And so there's even so I think that the education of engineers as it
Mhm.
concerns
Mhm.
cyber is becoming more and more of an emphasis for a lot of these training organizations coming out. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is really important because I think there's one element of just, really integrating um, good cyber engineering practices, just
Mhm.
like we had with good manufacturing practices
Right.
in engineering on industrial control systems for discrete automation are very similar.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the cyber informed engineering
There we go.
lends itself. So I'm definitely a big believer in that. Let me ask you this. So we're kind of talking about some of the constrained
Yeah.
personnel, constrained budgets, on that theme, whether it's a top 5, top 10, what are the top things that some of these municipalities should be considering from controls, not just maybe technical controls
Right.
or compensating controls, but maybe administrative, whatever the case may be. What are your views there, Gabriel?
I think probably so. I'm going to combine a little bit of what you
Yeah.
said. So, as it concerns cyber informed engineering, that
Mhm.
is something that we're big on with with Idaho National Labs has a methodology for evaluating cyber risk within control system environments. It's called CCE, or consequence driven cyber informed engineering. It's a methodology that pretty much helps organizations boil up some of the highest priorities, what they call high consequence events, to their control systems. And most notably, I think that water can really utilize this. I mean, we were even talking before this as it concerns secure remote access, asset inventories, network monitoring. I mean, threat detection, incident
Yeah,
response,
yeah,
preparedness. You can have so many different things that you focus in on layering the cyber defenses for your organization. Where I think that with an engineering mindset, you want to boil up the things that can really cause you to have the worst day. You want to prioritize that in your cyber strategy. So I think that CCE, or consequence driven cyber informed engineering, that methodology, taking an organization through that methodology, can really help them focus in on what their priorities are. But I named a couple of those there too, right? Remote access,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
probably secure remote access. That's probably one of the top ones there that we're seeing. And also maybe a little bit of a dark horse there is cyber governance, right? Really having a cybersecurity program where you have incident response plans, policies and procedures and standards for how you will operate securely from a day-to-day perspective within your water or wastewater environment. So those are maybe
Yeah.
the top 2/2.5 there.
Yeah, I think definitely a line there. I definitely see secure remote access is probably one of the biggest challenges within water, because it's a big need. Um, I think at this point, it's been a long time since I've seen a water system that didn't have a DMZ firewall, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
One thing I think that's one of the first go-tos. You've got to have that strong edge. Of course, you have all your physical controls around the site, and ingress, egress, cameras,
Mhm.
all that is just very crucial. But I think it's really understanding your systems, having
Yes.
understanding the impacts of those systems, and having that documented as part of that process. But just some good old fashioned, probably a backup strategy
Yeah.
for not just the process control network, more of the PC based systems such as the SCADA,
Listen,
but down to
yes,
the control system network.
Roger, we've been seeing that more and more, because what's been happening with a lot of our customer base is that they're experiencing transformation within their environment, where things are, like you were mentioning, serial communications previous. Many are going towards large SCADA upgrade projects, and even at times some DCS type of projects, where that's all digital, right? They're doing these large scale projects, but at times cyber isn't really the primary concern. There might be some elements in there, but embedding cyber into these upgrade and transformational projects is another thing that organizations should really consider. So yes, I'm right there with you. Is that really needs to be prioritized there, and the
Yeah,
effects of those systems.
yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. I think one thing that's somewhat unique in water is when you think about that industrial DMZ as an example.
Mhm. Okay.
So what's the other side of that, right?
Mm.
With
Yeah.
most businesses, that's your IT side. Well, for a water system, that's probably the city network, right?
Yes.
Elements of the city, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
it's what I haven't seen. I'm sure it exists
Mhm.
for some larger water systems out there, but
Yep.
the idea of having a SOC for your water system, yeah, it's probably not viable. right?
Not at
Probably
the
not even
moment.
justified,
See,
honestly.
now that's something that's something that's really interesting, because I think that there can be, so yes, that industrial DMZ, or that area that's connected. So I think that a point that comes up in my mind are those intermediary systems, or those shared systems between those environments. So that DMZ might have, antivirus and patching there, but like you mentioned, also the city network might connect in there as well, combined with that of the water control systems. I do think that there are logs, and there is certain types of telemetry that can go from your control system environment into some type of IT managed SOC,
Yeah.
with OT informed SOC analysts, right? You can send SNMP, you can send syslog, things that might tell you if systems go up or down, or it can also tell you about login events. These are things that we heavily considered during some incident response engagements. Like, what are some of those shared systems? Like, is there a human machine interface that is shared between IT and OT that needs to be considered, because that could be a bridge of an adversary into your control system environment? So, I mean, a lot there. But yes, I absolutely agree. Well, the funding is difficult to have a dedicated OT SOC, but I still do think that there can be some logging, some telemetry that can be sent or forwarded to an IT SOC to give some level of visibility and some level of understanding of systems within OT.
I think that's a challenging area, and that's where I have
Yeah.
probably some very specific opinions, right? Having
Yeah.
focused on building many of these systems out before. I think a lot of the control system, like for example, if we think about the process control network from the control system network and field device network, when we're thinking about the control system network and south, one of the challenges when you get on that embedded system, there's very few controllers today that have even a notion of security eventing or syslog capability. So what
Yeah.
I like to look at things from a more of a pragmatic approach. So if we think about the process control network that is interfacing with the embedded systems and RTOM, the real-time operating system, type control system, I think focusing on that layer, where generally speaking, this is predominantly running Windows, although I will say within the water sector is probably the highest prevalence of Linux in the industrial automation world. But having said that,
Linux and
you're
strip
still
down
talking
Windows,
about
yes.
a compute. Yeah, you're talking about a compute PC-based system that's interfacing. So that's an opportunity that, yes, log file analysis, I think is important. It's a feed. One of the challenges I think about when we're talking about monitoring for events for when it comes to OT, Gabriel, is this notion of you're putting all your sensors until you're getting all your telemetry south of that industrial DMZ, because you simply you have no early warning system.
Yeah.
If you have an adversary that's already landed on that process control network, I mean, that's a living. It's right for living off the land, right?
It is.
It's so important to have the context, and I think this goes back to your point on the consequence in cyber informed engineering of the system, understanding the impacts, so that within a SOC that might be part of the city, that you have an OT SOC team that's a subset of your SOC team, and that way you're combining your situational awareness and not just getting your alerts after it's like, oh,
right. They're already here type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that is the challenge. I think that does move us also to that alerting or preparing for that alerting. That's I definitely can see that for sure.
Yeah.
And I do think that we've had a heavy reliance on the network telemetry, where
Absolutely.
I know that when I've done different incident response engagements, one of the major things that I'm looking for within OT is encrypted network traffic, because many times a lot of the traffic is not encrypted. So encrypted network traffic within the control system environment just sticks out like a sore thumb. That almost says, hey, here is malware. But I also do think, and I don't mean to move us so away from that point, but I don't think a lot of organizations are considering what happens after the incident, right? They're like, well, I've been hacked. I bring in a consultancy to bring me back up to some degree, right? We're rotating passwords, we're shutting down systems, we're shutting down remote connectivity, but where is the rebuilding of these environments? In many cases, if ransomware gets on the PLC, it might brick it, right? It might just make that whole system inoperable. So I think that that's another focus that we have at Jacobs is post-incident resilience, is that, hey, what type of organization can help you rebuild your SCADA servers, rebuild your HMIs, and reprogram your PLCs? I think that that's another maybe blind spot or weak area that organizations really need to consider in this whole, I guess, incident handling and incident response life cycle. That recovery piece is definitely very important.
Yeah, I think that's good. And this might be a good way to
Yeah.
maybe a time to pivot into some of the standards and frameworks.
Sure.
Generally speaking, what I like to talk to organizations about is how do we build out a program? And first of all, what is the definition of program, right? So, I'm kind of old school in that security is people, process, and technology. And I think having the people trained, we've kind of talked about that a little bit, and that's challenging with the constraints. Technology, we kind of addressed some of the controls there, but on the process side, it's having the plant specific, the water treatment system specific incident response plan, and then how does that plan integrate within our OT or ICS incident response process, and how does that integrate within the city's incident response framework, right? And then how are we doing testing, right? And then as we're doing those tabletop exercises, how are we doing these in a coordinated fashion with different elements of the city, maybe, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's really important. And then how are we doing these after actions and improving that? So, I think these are really important measures, but also, so it's not just on the incident response, it's also on the recovery.
Yes.
I think that's where it's, these are just things that how you can measure the effectiveness of a program. I'm a fan of really taking a maturity-based approach, because that's all about defining, okay, our early entry point is defining what we should be doing. And then we're defining how we should be doing it. And then we're producing, we can produce the evidence that demonstrate we're following that how to do it, and we're improving it, right? So that's ultimately how we can improve it. Absolutely.
Yeah, to measure. I don't know if you conducted these tabletop exercises between IT and OT or city folk, but sometimes I've conducted them where it'll be the first time that certain people that work for the same organization are in the same room talking about cyber, right? There might be controls or process engineers that are talking to IT SOC analysts, and they're like, hi, nice to meet you. When the thing that's so interesting in kind of being on both sides, that tabletop exercise, but also during an incident, is that there is no separation between IT and OT during a cyber incident for a large organization. It's not. When this organization gets hacked, the entirety, it's all hands on deck. So I do agree with you. During the first time that your folk are meeting who deal with cyber incidents should not be during the tabletop exercise, or I'm sorry, it should not be during an incident, right? Those tabletop exercises help with familiarity, responsibilities. You can put together RACI matrix. You can understand, hey, when something happens, this is who I can call within my organization to help bring things back up and running. So absolutely, those tabletop exercises are extremely important.
So I'm kind of curious, Gabriel, what is your view and maybe the Jacobs view in terms of what you're recommending to municipalities that you're working with on the water side in terms of standards and frameworks? There's a collection of different, whether it's the, American Water Works or the NIST 882 or CSF or 6443. What is your view in terms of recommendations there?
It's literally a combination of everything. We have almost a tailored view of it. So everything a lot of times just comes from that NIST 853 controls framework, right? So that's kind of the parent of everybody. But then it drills down into, like you were mentioning, the NIST 800 or the NIST CSF 2.0. That's a big one that we utilize in really structuring and stepping a customer through. Hey, what level of maturity and evaluating where they are from a cybersecurity program perspective, like you mentioned. We also we also, especially in design, utilize IEC 62443, right? The zones and the conduits and segmenting and separating systems and really understanding flow data and protocol analysis, looking at a lot of that. What are those mechanisms in IEC 62443 that we can help in design? But then we also are utilizing
How prominent is that? If you don't mind me asking, on the 62443 side, on the zones and conduits,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I think theoretically it's a good
Yeah.
idea, but
Mhm.
I think there's challenges in realizing it. Again, going to personnel and budget constraints. But
right.
maybe I'm
Yeah, because even
pessimistic.
even getting that understanding from engineers of
Mhm.
what that method or what that methodology is can be difficult, and really segmenting these systems and these assets into certain categories and only putting them here and not putting them over here and only allowing this particular communication happening. It is a much we see this greater implemented in more mature organizations,
Yeah.
where in many cases we're just utilizing the Purdue model to give a visualization of what
Okay.
these levels are and what
Yeah.
systems are talking and how the network is structured. So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
I do think it can be challenging for a lot of folk that are not heavily engineering focused, but like I said, mature customers have very much so utilized the
Yeah.
IEC 62443 in a lot of our design work that we've been doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good, and this is one of the common, I think, pitfalls for a lot of organizations, not just water,
Yeah.
of looking at all the slew of different standards and frameworks out there. And,
Mhm.
it's not, none of them, in my opinion, are
Yeah.
intended to be compliance against those. They're intended to be the guidance to define your program for your
Right.
organization.
Right.
I think that, when it comes to the 62443, I think that's a great body of work. I do think that there's practical challenges within the water sector there, specifically around the security level targets.
Yeah.
The way you're kind of looking at that adversarial statement of defining the security level of, SO1 against accidental misuse. An
Yeah.
adversary with low means low capability, being the SL2, or a
Mhm.
12-year-old with access to YouTube. My challenge when I look at a water system is it's hard to really justify anything below an SL3. And then when you start mapping the controls in that design, that's where it becomes not as
Very
realistic
complex. Yeah.
financially and with the
Yeah.
do I think it's the ideal scenario or a really good solution? Oh, heck yes.
Yeah.
But
The
the
level of
pragmatic side
effort,
of me is
the complexity there is, and just kind of building that out in a program
yeah,
can be very difficult. And that's why I really like.
yeah.
I'm going to keep ringing the INLCCE bell
Oh
because
yeah.
it really
I
does a
think
lot
I
of
think
that
it's the
work.
right approach. Yeah.
It is. It really gives you your highest consequence events, the critical functions, the critical systems that are involved in the process. And you're saying that, hey, you want to focus in first here on what my worst day would be if this had happened. And then I'm gonna defend against that, or I'm gonna create remediations, I'm gonna engineer cyber within to help to protect against those high consequence events, right? From an adversary or perspective. I think that really helps to boil
Yeah.
things down. But I do think there are some very intelligent, very smart people that had developed some of the more complex standards and approaches. I just don't think at times it can be practical for these municipalities who are primarily responsible for delivering clean water to a local customer base.
It's the mission, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
100%.
totally agree. I think the water sector, generally speaking, requires a much more pragmatic approach than almost any other sector.
Yes.
So maybe what we ought to do here, Gabriel, is jump into a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I see we've got a really good one here. I don't know if I should mention her name here, but basically saying hi to us and thanks for the combo. But related to maturity, I have always see gaps highlighted, but I rarely see anyone try to tackle the absolute inundation of information out there today on threats, education, engagement. How do we help build better roadmaps in a choose your own adventure landscape? Wow, I love how you framed that. That's a really good question, and it's a very loaded question. So,
and Roger, maybe you run into this, right? Every customer is different.
Yeah,
everybody needs a tailored approach at times, especially as a consultancy that is kind of dealing with these cyber incidents on the day-to-day. I don't think it's right now a standardization of what every organization needs to do. I think that there is an identification of what those gaps are, which I think is what the comment is saying. But really, you need to really sit down and think through the tailored issues of your organization with a third party at times in order to really get to the root of where that organization needs to prioritize their cyber efforts, if that makes sense. That's just at a high level of some of what my thoughts are there.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think that's kind of our traditional answer of, hey, bring in a consultant, right? And at this point, most organizations have some type of an assessment sitting in there collecting dust somewhere, right? But
I've seen a 10-year assessment. I've seen 10 plus years as assessment that was sent as a data collection. But agreed. Agreed.
Let me see if I can't take a crack at answering the question this way. So first of all, I think I mentioned I'm definitely a fan of using a maturity-based approach of measuring progress of a program at the organizational level. Now, what do I mean by that, right? So if it's a manufacturing, it's across all of your fleets of manufacturing sites, distribution centers. If it's the water program, then it's across all of your freshwater, wastewater, pump stations, right? Now, I like having, for a lot of organizations, I've always liked using the NIST CSF at the program level. If for no other reason, I think when you're talking about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, it's plain language. So you can have a conversation that's very non-technical at the highest level. Of course, the further you double click into that, it gets more granular. And then what a lot of people don't even realize is once you get to that subcategory or that requirement level, well, it's really referencing back to a 62443 2-1 or, COBIT or some other source anyway. But comparing that to the question with CMMI, the capability maturity model, what a lot of people don't realize is there is a model for almost everything from services to, so I really think that's a really good measure of an organization. Now, what my experience has shown me doing this for so long is at the end of the day, when you're doing these roadmaps based upon these assessments, you could broadly, and everyone has a slightly different approach, but when we do our recommendations, we try to do this in a way that's defining initiatives that client could adopt, right? So end of the day, you're probably looking at a boilerplate 10 to 12 groupings of initiatives that you're always going to be recommending based upon your findings to the question. Right. And I think that's where you can kind of boil this down. Now, one way that I have found that I'm a fan of is utilizing a tier-based model of defining the criticality of your sites. And then this aligns with your initiatives in terms of, let's define our critical sites
yeah.
or subsites first. Standard core next, and then non-essential is last, because not everything requires the same level of
Right.
investment. Let's focus on our
Right.
golden nuggets, right?
Right.
And then as we're progressing and we hit those maturity-based milestones in that initiative, well, that's where we can redefine. Okay, now we're moving on to the tier 2, and that's more of a pragmatic business case approach. So hopefully that answers the question out there of
Yep.
how you can kind of boil this down. And listen, I think there's a lot of good things out there in the top 5 or top 20 controls.
Yeah, the SANS top
That's where
5s.
being pragmatic.
I was going to mention that one. Yeah. The SANS top 5s are there for sure.
Yeah, so hopefully it answers that question. And I don't know if you want to take any of these other questions here, Gabriel, that we have. I think we've kind of addressed some of these. With rising interconnectivity between IT and OT systems, where should municipalities focus first to best strengthen their resilience? So resilience is interesting for, because often when we're thinking about resilience, right, we start to think about redundancy for industrial control systems. And, we get so caught up on the technology side of redundant SCADAs and maybe redundant controllers and redundant networks.
Redundant and diverse.
A lot of redundancy in the process itself, the piping, the valving, the sensors, right? So, I think as a consultant, if you're engaging or an engineer, you have to understand your system that's actually being automated, and what are the different levels of resilience that are inherent to that system design.
Right. And that's just, and that's where engineers in many cases prevail. Like they have an advantage there. They know, right? I think one thing that's even interesting, one thing that a lot of times we would do when we would do OT incident response is that we would get on the call with some of the plant engineers or process engineers and ask them, and able to understand the proliferation of that malware into their control system environment. We would ask them to go up to a controller and put their hand over it to kind of understand, hey, is this thing running hot? Is it running correctly, right? Because in many cases, they would have an understanding of what's happening within those systems from a physical perspective. Many cases, if you are pinging, even just pinging a PLC or pinging a controller, that can cause those CPU, you can cause that CPU to run really hot, and there might be some physical evidences of damage or something there. So I do think that those engineers' understanding of those control systems technologies is so important to being able to protect against some of those cyber things happening. So yeah.
I love how you started that. It's about engineering. Right?
Yes.
So absolutely. So we got another one popped in here. How should these organizations be thinking about evaluating cross-sector and or supply chain dependencies and prioritizing those risks against more urgent ones?
So supply chain and this kind of reminds me of the Aquippa PA cyber incident, where with the Unitronics PLCs. I do think that every organization needs to have some visibility into some of the latest and greatest threats information out there to give them a context of what's happening with some suppliers, and if their equipment might be on the chopping block, especially if it's internet connected and critical to their function. So yeah,
I think there's a couple of it's interesting. So from the water side on the supplier, we can look at supplier in a couple of different ways, and this is, I think, more of a emerging area today, is an OT specific third-party risk management program. And first of all, defining what are those vendors and suppliers. And I think when we think about industrial control systems, it's the large OEMs, the manufacturers of those PLCs, the industrial networks, and the SCADA systems. But it's also suppliers of services. And that's where in our world, whether it's solution partners or integrators, They are
Yeah.
such a key backbone of any system. And it's understanding that risk profile of those different suppliers and how they integrate. So that's one area that I would recommend is building out that program. And it is a almost like a specialized subset, once
Yeah.
again, of the larger system of your enterprise risk management program. So that's
Yeah.
what are
I
your
feel
thoughts there,
I feel
Gabriel?
like I got
Anything else?
I always feel like I got a small, like, practical story for everything that's kind of everything that you talk about. That third party, the integrators, the vendors that are coming into our environments are so important.
Yeah.
I know that I dealt with an incident where there was an integrator. There was like an engineering support. They would just do patching and vulnerability management of certain control systems. They would come in, I think once a month or every so often, to do upgrades, and they would bring in their own equipment. So just bringing in their own laptop,
Yeah.
right? They were bringing their own USB drives or on their own whatever they needed to upgrade those systems. And there was an incident where they actually introduced malware into the control system environment. So a lot of times people blame IT for all the issues of how malware gets into OT. In this case, there was an engineering integrator who had introduced malware into this environment. And one of the things that I looked at is that, hey, how are you all tracking the removable media that they're bringing in? Are you all doing scanning? Are you all providing them? I know with the nuclear, we provided them with laptops to service our environments, or even just knowing who had come into that facility over the weekend.
Yeah.
They had a physical sign-in sheet that did not have any vendor names on it. So I'm like, you're not even physically tracking these individuals. So that does leave a blind spot to third-party vendors coming into our control system environments and potentially introducing risk there. So
completely agree. And I think we've only answered the first part of the question.
We did, yeah.
I think this
The supply
it's
chain.
multifaceted answer, in my opinion. So number one, there's some additional resources really specifically within the water sector, such as the Water ISAC and
Yes.
CISA has a lot of good resources as well as, of course, the vulnerability alerts, which really begs it in the question of you need to have your OT vulnerability management program in place, because I'm a big believer it's not just about patching an OT, but it's about what technical controls do we have where maybe we can have a mitigation to that vulnerability, right?
Mhm.
And then understanding the context of not just the CVSS score, but the actual,
Right.
We need to triage that for our system. And again, this goes back to the challenges of we have a limited staff, limited resources. So these are real world challenges in the water side. I think this is one of your guys over at Jacobs, this last one. You want to take it?
Here this guy goes. So we asked, how do you see the threat landscape that utilities must respond to changing with ever increasing demand for changing climates and the AI data center boom? Dan, why did you throw that? Do you have thoughts on that, Roger? I know Dan has plenty of thoughts on it, but the increasing changing climates in AI data
I
center.
don't have an answer on the changing climates for the water sector and OT security. It's hats off to you, Dan. You're something, right?
He is.
AI
Dan was
data
on
center boom,
before.
though, it's really fascinating because it's probably more fascinating in the power sector, in my opinion, because of the demand, the power demand that is putting on the grid and generation in general.
Grid, yeah.
The other side of, though, if I could move away from just the AI data center side of it, is AI in general and the multi-changing definitions of all the things that make up AI and how it's such an emerging every week or two.
Yeah.
The new trend has hit it, and I have never seen anything faster moving than this. It's insane.
Where are we at now, Roger? Are we in an agentic AI and AI agents? I think ChatGPT just announced that, right? And agents being able to pretty much be a junior resource or a junior engineer or junior tech resource. Like you mentioned, it's just going, I mean, leaps and bounds beyond what we can keep up with at times.
Yeah, if I could offer any guidance to folks out there, is I think AI can be such a tremendous asset, but anyone who is maybe has a little bit of gray hair and some experience, right?
Sure. I got a little bit.
Sure.
I got a little bit coming in. So
there's, I think there's an element of when you're working with it, it can be a force multiplier. And if you've worked with it long enough, hallucinations are real. Where 90% of that output is really, really quite good, right? 10%, no, needs and that requires that human in the loop validation. That's crucial.
Yeah.
I think there's something that I personally believe is a really good approach for the OT in general, and that's agentic RAG, retrieval augmentation, where what we can do is we can take the information of our systems, the standards and frameworks we're using, to actually load up, for example, do embeddings in a vector database where now what we can do, instead of just chatting with an LLM, we're actually chatting from our agentic agent to our closed data set. That can actually reduce hallucinations dramatically because these
directly referencing.
Absolutely. So if you think about some of the resources available, just in terms of the ICS MITRE ATT&CK framework, the standards, frameworks, water ISAC, your systems, your controls, and you were to actually leverage it in that way and not sending this out to a general LLM,
right?
It can be a different world. But I'm going to stop AI kick there.
No, you're right. Yeah, and I think that maybe one of the other points, I'll make it quick, as it concerns climates, Jacob services a lot of organizations that have climate considerations to their environment. So when you're talking about advanced metering infrastructure and historical or trend data as it concerns severe climate to certain regions, we at Jacobs have been able to utilize that information to help them predictability of critical services, and, hospitals prioritizing these environments when there is a potential for negative effects occurring, right? Broadband outages or flooding or other infrastructure type of effects. So, but there is a cyber conversation within that, and I'm sure that we could be here all day if we pulled Dan onto the panel to discuss all of the impacts there. So just
we might have to do that at some point, Gabriel.
Maybe. I'd be okay with that.
Listen, if there's any other last minute questions, and by the way, if we didn't get to your question, one thing we like to do around here is we'll address this after the fact and put together little snippets and definitely get that sent out to everyone. Gabriel, absolute pleasure as always, my friend.
Same.
I think you bring tremendous insight into the sector, and it's really interesting to hear what Jacobs is doing over there. Any closing thoughts on your side, Gabriel?
None in particular, Roger. I just want to thank you for having me on. And I just really think that you're doing such a service to the industry. I mean, I tune in all the time to the YouTube channel and on LinkedIn to hear a lot of these insights and perspectives about what's happening within the industry. So just want to thank you and give you your flowers right now for all the work that you've been doing. So that's all I want to leave you with, is just a thanks and an appreciation for what you've done, for sure.
Well, thank
you. And what
Gabriel.
you're doing.
Yeah. Listen, it takes a village. And I love these just having conversations.
Sure.
I'm sure everyone in our community is very much like me, that you just no more death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Let's just have some conversations to share the knowledge. So
100%.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Definitely appreciate this, and feel free to reach out with any questions or follow up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining in today. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you did too. Thank you, Roger and Gabriel, for your time and insights today. If you had questions that we didn't get around to, please send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll get an answer back to you. For more information, please go to hillstrongsecurity.com and have a great day. Thanks.